Hello, brothers and sisters. It's your boy BC. Welcome back to the Based LDS video. And I know this was supposed to come at you very much earlier than this, but I had computer problems, and it's 2 a.m., and I have to be up to teach seminary in 4.5 hours. And then I have to go to the school in 5.5 hours, and then I have to take my daughter to soccer, and then I have to pick up dinner, and then I have to host family home evening here at our house, and then I have to, and you get the idea. So we're on to Pints of Aquinas now, finally. And forgive me if you see me shifting a lot. It's a small desk. I'm not comfortable here. I can't just stretch out and be like I want to be, So, but this is Pints with Aquinas. The host is Matthew, and he's going to do an interview with a gentleman named Stephen Johnson, who has left the church and joined Catholic. He's become Catholic. And this video we're going to do in two parts. Firstly, because the interview with Pints is almost 3.5 hours long. No. Secondly, the interview's all chopped up. It's slice of Stephen's personal life, 3 or 4 points of doctrine that are weird. Another slice of Stephen's life, 3 or 4 points of doctrine that are weird. Slice of Stephen's life, you get the idea. So it's you go back and forth, and you'll talk polygamy here and here and here. You'll talk this here and here, and then here and then here. It's all over the place. And so I want to keep it somewhat coherent. And so we're going to start off with just talking about Stephen's past life as an LDS member, how he grew up, and how he eventually left the church. And let me start this off. As far as Pints with Aquinas, I like the show. I'm not a regular watcher. I'm a casual watcher. I am subscribed. He talks philosophy and theology from a Catholic angle, and it's interesting. And he'll host a number of people on his show. But I'm disappointed because there's no follow-up, no pushback, no real wanting to know. This is just, tell us about these weird Mormons. But we respect them, we love them, we're charitable until we burn their books. I was just so burnt up by this. So I really think Pints with Aquinas, I think they're narrow-minded, they're out with an agenda, and this fits perfect to their plan. As far as the person they're interviewing, Stephen Johnson, he did another one called Millennial Mormon Becomes Catholic or something like that. He did that with Matthew Leonard, also a Catholic. Lives in the same place Stephen does. They go to the same parish together. And I think that's how he got introduced probably to Pints with Aquinas. Stephen's very much your typical millennial. You'll see that here. And I think he's emblematic of the reason we have problems with millennial membership. And honestly, I don't know how we do anything about it. I don't. Our culture has warped so much that millennials don't have a chance at faith without some very extraordinary help and assistance. And you're going to see that here. Either they get wrapped up in their own identity and the over influence of their own values, or they don't have identity and values, and they live on shifting sand, even though they think they're really well based. Stephen is one of those guys that never knows quite where to stand, and you'll see that throughout this interview. I do think he's sincere. I don't think he left the church out of malice. I don't think he had any malice in his heart towards the church. That's not true. I do think he does, but he's not overtly hostile. But he's going to prove he really doesn't know much about the church, about the gospel and the doctrines. He thinks he does. He definitely thinks he does. But he doesn't. And you guys will see that coming up. And this is the kind of thing guys like Pints with Aquinas, Matt and Thursday, the host and the producer on Pints, this kind of thing they feed on. It's the same thing that Apologia feeds on, or Delin, or any of these guys. That ignorance. So let's just get started. And again, we won't be talking a lot of doctrine here. There's one little part, we'll talk a little doctrine because it gets into an experience he had that he didn't like. But you're going to find out it's kind of shallow up for a while. Here we go.
I am really excited to hear about your story.
Here we go.
And I intentionally, when we met the other day, I know I learned a little bit about it, but I was excited to learn more about it live, so it wouldn't feel like a canned interview.
Sure.
So you were raised Mormon?
I was, yeah. I was born and raised Mormon. My family isn't you have multi-generational Mormon families, families that can tie their lineage back to the pioneers that moved across the frontier. So my family was brought into it by my grandfather. He was adopted by a Mormon family. So we don't have the pedigree, but that's all I knew my entire life, my upbringing. Yeah.
So this is going to sound like, I don't know, maybe this is a weird question to answer because it's all you knew. But for those of us who are watching, a lot of us are Catholics. And although I have had a few people in the live chat say they were Mormon who converted to Catholicism, but what's it like being raised as a Mormon?
Yeah.
First question. Good question. Here we go.
It was great. It was definitely great. I loved my upbringing. We were deeply invested in the church. I mean, it was one of those hallmarks of my identity. It's who I was. All my friend group, they were Mormon. My brothers and sisters, all Mormon, stayed in the faith, rooted in the faith. My parents had a strong testimony and held callings, and so we were always very involved with the church. And the history of the church, it's something that you can tap into because it's not so far back and so removed that it feels alien to you. Since it's more modern history, it felt more approximate to who we were and our own story. So it felt like we were living this thing out. And because it is quintessentially American, I mean, it's so easy to identify with. And I think that that's part of its appeal, is how close it is to people in our way of thinking, in our American culture. And it really helps you settle into it and accept it and believe it and live it out.
I know, like as Catholics, we go to Rome.
And I think these are great points so far. Yeah, these are things we can easily identify with. These are things that we can all imagine. We're more relatable to the 1800s, right, than we are to the year 0. Fact. We don't know a lot about the Romans and the Greeks and the Jews around that time. But we can watch a Western or Little House on the Prairie, and we're right there. So we're going to fast forward a little bit. He's going to talk about how there was a trip to a couple church history sites that were very impactful and informative to him. And that seeing them is kind of like seeing Rome in its grandeur now as a Catholic. So we're going to skip that. We're going to move on to the next little formative part. Here we go.
I want to go. I want to talk about like the history of LDS, and I'm sure you're not sitting here like you're an expert on LDS. I don't know.
No, definitely not.
So, but okay. So, what's it like? I imagine like most people brought up in a faith or a particular worldview that they do so unquestioningly. I know for me as a Catholic, I didn't really question it, but I found it boring, maybe, and then as I kind of was more influenced and impacted by the culture, I began to be more critical of like Catholic teaching, especially as it pertained to human sexuality and things like that. And then I started asking questions like, do we really know God exists, or is this just some fairy tale that someone invented to make everybody feel better about death? Did you have a progression like that? When did you ever begin maybe even questioning with other LDS friends the reliability of what you'd been told?
There were a few instances where that happened. It was later in my life, I guess, when I was a teenager. But as a kid, one of the things that the LDS Church is very good at doing is immersing you in the story.
This is where he lays the groundwork, and many ex-Mormons do this. This is what... that we manage our children in such a way that they're taught never to question or to wonder. And we do it through conditioning. He's not using those words, I am, but you'll hear it when he talks about it.
The God story, as it were. And so the participation from the young people is encouraged at a really early age. And so once a month, the LDS Church will do what's called Fast and Testimony Meeting, where it's a separate service.
The bane of every missionary out there, Fast and Testimony Meeting. You never know what's going to be said, especially when you have an investigator there.
Well, not separate, but it is a unique service that's done once a month, where rather than receiving talks or sermons from the pulpit, it's open mic, essentially. And so the congregation is asked to come up and bear their testimony. And having young children go up there and do it is sort of, it's the icing, hearing the young, innocent voices of the babes go up there and say and affirm what everybody believes. And so from a really early age, I was doing that myself. From the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I would go up and stand in front of the congregation. And it was almost always the same as, I believe that the church is true. I believe that Joseph Smith is the prophet. I believe that the Book of Mormon is the word of God. And you would say these things, and you'd close in the name of Jesus Christ, and then you'd go and sit back down and join your family. And then your younger brother would go up and do the same thing. And so this was part of life. It was a continual coming in contact with the belief, with the profession, and professing it in front of everybody and being affirmed. And that was a big part. So as a young person, you would go, with your nerves and, the butterflies, but then you'd go and sit back down and you'd have somebody tap you on the shoulder and say, good job, and really build up the community like that. And beyond.
So it's that positive reinforcement as a child. It sounds innocent, right? But you get where he's going with it. Like, very early on, they teach you to bear your testimony, to get up there and say these things.
Beyond that, it was something that you could see lived out. So we have the LDS Church is really strict on its geographical boundaries, right? So if you're living in a particular spot, if your address is such and such, you have to go to this building, and you have to go to this building at this time. And then that way you're always coming in contact with the same people. My family is friends with this family, and we meet a couple times a week at church, and then we'll get together and play, or we drive together to school. And so we're just knitted together, and we're saying.
So
the
if you
same
tried
things.
to go to a different church in a different location, would they be like, hey, thanks for being here, but you're actually supposed to be?
They'll send you back.
Okay.
Yeah. So even if there's, and this happens all the time, a bit of contention, which exists in every community, gossiping or backbiting.
See, notice he says, even if, which means, well, you're not allowed to run away from your problems. Now, here's one thing. Aquinas pushes back a little bit.
That's still not grounds. So they'll send you back and encourage you, like, look, work with your priesthood leadership, work it out with this other family and this other person, but you need to stay where you are.
There's real wisdom in that, I think.
I think so, too. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with. Yeah. Because the proof is in the pudding. You see how well these communities function. And so that was a big part of it, just living out the story, knowing what the story was. And the catechesis that happens, they want to call it that, but the catechesis that happens in the formation.
Catechesis is the lessons you learn before baptism or confirmation. So the very basic primary lessons before you're 8, and the missionary lessons before you're baptized. They're going to talk here. I'm going to fast forward through this part, but they're going to talk here. When they talk about catechesis, he's going to say that with Mormonism, it's very simple. But Catholicism is like a great jungle you don't quite know how to approach or to grapple with. And his example is going to be the diagram that missionaries use to explain the plan of salvation. Mortal, premortal existence, veil, earth life, spiritual death, prison, paradise, physical death, grave, judgment bar, 3 degrees of glory. And outer darkness, because you gotta mention that. And how it's very simplistic, But Catholicism is so much bigger and grander than that. And then they get into other smaller points of doctrine. So again, we're going to skip these points of doctrine. I just want you to see how he's progressing as a person here and how he's thinking and feeling about the church early on. So far, it's very positive, but you can see now that he's in like the hindsight aspect of his life, he's like, yeah, well, even if you try and get away, but there's wisdom in that. Well, yeah, there is. Children get up and bear their testimony. And, oh, good job, Joey. And then his brother gets up, and it's that reinforcement. Here we go. Let's move on to the next part.
Did you ever, as a child, what was your view of other Christian churches, and did you ever have doubts that maybe this isn't totally true as a child and as a teenager?
No, not really. I guess my earliest doubts came when I was a young adult.
Okay.
As a kid, so I grew up until I was about 7 years old in Utah, and so I was just, that's everything I knew. Yeah. So I didn't have any interactions with Christians, non-denominational, evangelicals, or Catholics otherwise. After that, I moved to Southern California, and there I was first exposed to other faiths.
Okay.
And
all right, so it's at this point now where he's going to go into talking about the first vision, receiving other revelations, being told to build a church. And he's not going to tell it quite correct. It's generally right, but you can tell he's missing that. He doesn't know this. So you can really wonder how much he really knows or understands, right? Here we go to the next part. All right, so now we're going to get into a point. We're actually going to let a bit of the doctrine roll out here. You're going to hear how he first encountered doubt and how he was first, when he asked a question, how he was treated. So listen to this.
Wow.
And again, we're going to let the doctrine play out.
All right. Well, unless you have more to say on that, and feel free to if you've got more, because I want to ask when you started questioning it then. But
okay.
Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think we can move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So at what age and how was it that you said, I don't know, there's something that we might not be right here?
So one of the first instance of something like that, I was every Sunday meeting, with the exception of the fast and testimony meetings and the stake meetings and whatnot, the normal meeting pattern goes as such. There are talks given, 2 youth talks generally, and 2 adult speakers will give talks. And the topic is assigned generally by either the bishop or somebody who presides over the congregation. Mm-hmm. And this is especially true of the youth speakers. The youth speakers will be given a topic. And this one time I was asked to speak, and I don't know if I was assigned a topic, but I began doing research into what's called the Book of Abraham. And so this makes up a small part of what is the Pearl of Great Price, which is another part of the canon of LDS Scripture.
You can feel it coming already, can't you? Ugh.
And so in the Pearl of Great Price, the Book of Abraham, this is where a lot of the more esoteric doctrines of Mormonism are detailed. And so you have the idea of eternal progression detailed there, that God is not the only God, he's God of this world, and that there's a movement of exaltation. And one of the things that's detailed in there is that God the Father exists somewhere within our cosmos near the star Kolob. And so this is, who knows where it is, perhaps at the center of a galaxy or at the center of the universe.
I want to see Matt, the host. I want to see his face while Stephen's talking about this stuff. I cannot.
Star Kolob, and that's the closest residing star to where God dwells.
Right. I don't think we've said this up until now, but according to LDS theology, God has a body. Mm-hmm. So he's actually existing somewhere, which might surprise some Catholics.
Yep. Yeah. So physical body existing.
This topic we'll cover in depth later on. I think this is a fascinating topic that I think we need to get into when we talk about the differences between mainstream Christian and LDS thought. But again, you can see how Stephen's relating this stuff and how it's all because he's preparing to give a talk.
In time and space, so he's somewhere in the cosmos. And wherever he is, he's near the star Kolob.
Okay.
And so as a 15, 16 years old, I was diving into this, and I was incredibly fascinated by it, like getting into the more esoteric teachings of the church. And so I was diving into this, preparing a talk.
Esoteric are supposed to be higher level teachings of limited knowledge. So he thinks he's really reaching for the stars here.
And the thought that I had come to my mind was, okay, so our God is our God, and he has his own God, and he has his own God. And I went to my older brother, who's 4 years older than me. So, granted, he's not an expert in this or anything. And I asked him, so if our God has a God and he has a God, like, who's the first God? And he looks at me and he says,
can you tell where this is going? Can you just grasp it? Ugh.
You shouldn't ask those questions. And that was it. It stopped the conversation. It stopped my research into it. I felt like I was doing something wrong by looking into it and asking those questions. And
because your brother, who's a few years older than you, didn't understand it and just said, well, you shouldn't look into it. Well, he shouldn't, because he's too young and too immature and probably doesn't understand enough about the gospel itself to get into the progression of God. But there you go. Well, you're not allowed to ask questions. So I felt really just stymied.
And so from that time forward, it just wasn't something I really peered into. It was interesting, and I wanted to know about it because it was in our scriptures and as part of our official teachings. But I don't think it rose to the level of a doubt. It was just a curiosity that ran into the brick wall of don't ask those questions.
Yeah. I mean, we have something similar, right? In all.
And see, at least Aquinas is being honest here. Milk before meat. That's not the words Aquinas will use, but that's what we use, right? I'm sure they have something similar. Maybe they use milk before meat. But that's what he's going to lead to here. Well, there are things that, for them, it's the mysteries. For us, it's milk before meat. And Stephen needs milk. He desperately needs milk. Let's move on to him preparing for a mission after another 2 years. Because here he's saying he's 15, 16, so 17, 18, 19 is preparing for his mission. Let's find out, shall we?
Wife. What did you think when you realized she's Catholic?
It wasn't anything that she took serious ever. Okay. At that point in her life, she's Hispanic, and so it was a cultural thing. But her family had always been very inactive, and so it was just always an afterthought for her. Yeah. And growing up in the culture that we did, it was not important. And like any young person going through high school, the experience much more drawn in towards the world and wanting to engage in what high schoolers do.
Was it important to you that she become LDS?
Yeah, it was. For one reason, probably the dominant reason was just acceptance into my community. And, so I was still really deeply rooted into the faith life. All throughout high school, it's called seminary, which is you meet in the mornings before high school begins to scripture study. I was going to church 4 or 5 times a week, including the Sunday service, for different meetings. Seminary in the mornings. I was involved with young men's group. The LDS Church had been really involved with the Boy Scout organization. And so I received my Eagle Scout through the LDS Church. And I did all of these different activities, including summer trips and camping trips. And so it was just a huge part of who I was and what it was that I was doing and where I wanted to take my life and where I saw it.
How you wanted to raise your children.
Exactly. And so she understood that and she appreciated it. And so she began taking the missionary lessons, it's just a crash course.
For her, was it more about being enculturated, or was she trying to discern, is what you're saying true?
It was both. Yeah, without a doubt, it was both. So as I would pitch the LDS Church to her and say, this is why there needed to be a restoration of the gospel, or this is why Joseph Smith is the true prophet, or this is why the Book of Mormon is trustworthy as a testament of Jesus Christ.
Did she have questions that rattled you, or not really?
No, not really. I mean, I knew my faith well enough, and I knew
How to respond to common objections
Right.
and questions. Yeah.
So
See, that's kind of a loaded question. He's just explained that his girlfriend is lapsed Catholic. Parents are lapsed Catholic. It's a cultural thing, doesn't really care. She's not going to come up with deep, hard questions, right? She's not so committed to her faith that she's going to ask probing, penetrating questions. And let's keep in mind, I'm a seminary teacher. These kids are not really engaged with the scriptures. You really hope they will be. You'll hope they catch fire. There are some that will be, but for the most part, they're just kind of there. They're doing their time. So I'm sure he's active and that he's doing all the things that the youth are doing, right? Because they're going to scouts and they're going because they're not at home being bored. They're not out on the streets causing trouble. But being active does not necessarily mean being on the road to conversion, right? I think we can all recognize the difference. And again, this girl he's meeting, he cares for her very deeply. And they're going to be good for each other for a bit. Here we go. Let's see. And they still are. So,
and she was ignorant enough about her own faith and
Yeah.
what Christianity was and what Scripture taught to really refute anything that I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, and plus she was getting it from more than just me. So it was me. Every time she came over to visit with my family, it was the life.
Yeah.
And even her own family would had been exposed to it. So one of her uncles was baptized and became Mormon. So she had some exposure to it. And to be honest, I mean the faith life and family life of your average LDS person, it's strong. And I think that it's a shining light for most people that compared to the
they
culture.
see how attractive it is.
Yeah, and they desire it because it is beautiful. And we told each other that we love you, and we cleaned up after ourselves, and the house was tidy, and we did what we were supposed to do, and we had good relationships with our brothers and sisters and mom and dad. And so what we had, it's appealing for most people, whether it's subconscious or not. I think they look at it and see the order to it and think like, this is good. This is a good thing.
and see, these are the things that attract people to our church, right? These are the things that attract people to us. And they're also the things culturally that make it hard for people to leave. I will fully admit that. It has got to be hard to leave because of the culture shock. Because of the things you're going to miss out on. This is all very, very nice to this point.
Heard that Mormons will do a game night once a week with their family or something.
Yeah. Okay. So more.
We're going to get into the weeds here with family meeting. We'll just skip on this a little bit. So somewhere here, I missed it. I can't find it. And it's late enough. I'm not going to go deep searching for it. He's talked about meeting this girl. Falling in love. They're in the process of getting her converted. And remember, he's a dedicated member. But there's a point here he talks about how he realizes if he goes on a mission, he's going to lose her, so he's not going to go on the mission. And instead, he's going to, I think the word he used was he's going to use a loophole. Where if you don't serve your mission, you at least serve your country. So he's going to join the military instead. Because that's the thing the church allows. If you don't go on your mission, you can go on the military. So he gets married at 19, joins the military. And he's going to go into pararescue. All very noble. But yeah, I don't know that there's a military loophole to avoid the mission. And I don't know that you can exactly... I mean, I don't want to be too harsh here, but let's face it. If you forego your mission because you're afraid of losing your girlfriend, your faith is not intact, and your faith is not in God. Your faith is in the world. Right? This is where he's at 19. And he talks about he's going to go into pararescue, which is like Air Force Special Forces, and that he's going to be embedded in Fallujah in Iraq after a couple years training. So he's 21, 22. And I've heard both. In the Matthew Leonard, I think he says 22, and here I think he says 21. And it's while he's in the military in Fallujah that he decides to read the Book of Mormon. He skipped his mission, joined the military. You're not going to church every day. And with Matthew Leonard, he admits, while he's in the military, he's not doing the church thing. He's doing the world thing. This is a kid who had no problem leaving the church behind. Hey, I got my girl. That's all. I'm done. Done. Right? They did the temple. They did the marriage thing because she was converted. They couldn't go to the temple. They were going to do that later. But they got married and done. He's, in his mind, he's done. He's done he's checked his boxes. The mission was foregone. Not going to happen. But he did the military for the loophole, so everything was still okay. And here we go. So we're at the point he's in Fallujah. And he's not comfortable. He's scared. ISIS is coming in. I'm going to bring this up because in this video, and I'm going to skip it because it's kind of long, it's chopped up, but he says he's active while he's training. But in the Matthew Leonard, he's like, yeah, I really wasn't active until Fallujah. Then the risk of death, he decides, time to pick up the Book of Mormon again because I'm probably going to die. And he's going to get into that a little bit here.
Wanting to, for the first time as an adult, seriously look at and the Book of Mormon and my faith and reconnect with God in a way that I hadn't been throughout the previous 3 years of military training. And so I began reading the Book of Mormon, and I encountered this part not too far into the Book of Mormon. It's in the third book, where there's a condemnation of polygamy, where God, speaking to this the civilization, condemns it, and even condemns David and Solomon for having practiced polygamy and calls it an abomination. And so as soon as I read that, I was like, I don't know what to make of that, because like here's God speaking very sternly against and prohibiting the practice of polygamy, and yet I know that we had done that. Like it was a big part of our past, and so that began a deep dive into the faith, like really wanting to get into the weeds of Joseph Smith, the history.
And he's going to give himself a whole, say, 6 months to do it, the time he's in Fallujah. And wait till you find out what the deep dive is.
The origin of the church, and how it developed over time. And so over the next 4 or 5 months while I was in Baghdad, because of the amount of downtime we had as we were just waiting, this was all of my personal time was just dedicated to this, and I was going in deep into it as I could, and I was reading biographies, and one of those biographies, it's called Rough Stone Rolling, which is a biography.
And there it is. See, this is where we get in trouble. Bushman's a respected guy. But of the sources I've read, I have not yet seen anything where Cowdery, Emma, any of these people that helped Joseph translate talked about seer stones, head in a hat. And this is where you get to the kind of a divide we have in the church right now as far as who's credible sources and who's not. And the thing is, I don't think Bushman's discredible. That's not the word. But it certainly seems, from what I'm catching so far, that he really does pull a lot of his Joseph did this, Joseph did that, from not friendly sources. And so you wonder what this effect is having on people. Like, I read it, didn't care, didn't, whatever. This guy's a completely different place. And rough stone rolling is going to lead him down a wormhole, a spiral.
Biography of Joseph Smith, written from a faithful LDS person's perspective, but not shying away from some more of the problematic aspects of the foundation of the church and the founder of the church. And so it goes deep into explaining the extent of polygamy and how it was being practiced and how it was implemented, and the age of some of the women that Joseph Smith was marrying, and some of the coercive ways that he was bringing women and families into agreeing to practice polygamy. And some of them were so extreme as him threatening women, saying that God is going to send down an angel with a flaming sword to kill me if you don't agree to marry me. So not unlike what he had said to Emma, right? And finding out that he married a 14-year-old girl, and some of the families he had sent the husband away so that he could marry in secret his wife. And so just really sort of the dregs of how this was practiced. And even in Nauvoo, when polygamy was in full swing, like the depravity of it, and it was a power play. So if somebody was stepping out of line, well, we could just seize their family from them, and their families can just be given to another man. And so it became just a way of
controlling. Exactly.
Yeah. Dominating.
So you get what the effect of rough stone rolling was upon this man. And he also gets into the accounts of the vision and just a lot of other stuff. And in his mind, this must all be church approved because he bought it at Deseret Bookstore. And the thing about history is there's always nuance and there's context. And I don't doubt that Brother Bushman's heart was in the right place, but there are things that have come to light that run counter to some of the things published in Rough Stone Rolling, right? Fanny Alger, not 14, 15, whatever it was. And Mosiah Hancock's memory maybe not so perfect, especially since some things he wasn't born for that he's reporting on. Not that Mosiah was a bad guy. He was honest, trying to do a service. I think he believed in things, but memory's not always reliable. And these people are writing after the fact. Even the well-intentioned ones are writing after the fact, and the bad-intentioned ones are especially writing after the fact. Or just making things up wholesale. So we'll keep going with how this Rolling Stone influenced him, but we're going to skip up for it just a little bit.
And I mentioned earlier in this conversation the first vision account. So if this biography was revealing is like, no, this was sort of just like piecemeal put together and things. And so the church had done a really good job of tailoring this story to make it a coherent, beautiful story that you could that would resonate and strike you as being something of divine origin. But just like with every other thing that's not of God, it's mixed in with so much different error and personality and faults and weaknesses and sin. And so this clean, pristine, inspiring story that I grew up knowing and revering was just crumbling.
Did it?
I'm waiting for him to learn about the Inquisition and Crusades. Like, seriously, dude. You really look at that face. He's like, eyes open. How do you not understand when the Lord says line upon line, precept upon precept? Why would he think that everything is going to be perfect as it's revealed? Why would he think that everything that's been said by Bushman is absolutely true when history is constantly undergoing revision? Why isn't he praying for answers? Why isn't he looking to better sources, additional sources? He is. We'll find that out, but they're not the best. Here we go.
So, and some of this I'm sharing with my wife. I'm not being perfectly transparent with her with where I'm at, and she had enough to deal with understanding that I was in a very dangerous place. And but shortly after I got home, I told her, I said, I need to talk to you. Like, can we sit down and talk? And she knew right away. She said, you're not going back to church.
Wow.
And
were you engaging with other men? Maybe they were Christians. Were you running some of these doubts by them?
No. So in Iraq, I was extremely isolated.
Okay.
Like it was the dynamic of the team that I was with was really poor and sort of corrupted, and
okay.
and so I felt very isolated.
So you were going through this on your own,
right? Which looking back on it, I can see God's hand, right? Like if this hadn't been established this way, if I wasn't in this place, given these circumstances, with this amount of time available to me, I may never have looked into it. And so,
did you ever question the claims of this Rough Stone Rolling book?
No.
Maybe he's wrong.
I had no reason to. And then everything.
That's one piece of feedback, the pushback that he offers. But I think he does it because he already knows where this is going to go, because clearly he didn't. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left the church. But brothers and sisters, let's understand. He's foregone a mission to get married. He's joined the military. He's someplace dangerous. And in the process of 4 to 5 months, he says himself, we'll call it 6, he's come to the conclusion that the church isn't true because of a verse in the Book of Mormon about polygamy and rough stone rolling. And he's going to admit here and shortly other unauthorized sources and podcasts. And I'm going to think they actually had a lot more to do with it than rough stone rolling. But I think he likes to use rough stone rolling. I could be wrong, just me, but let's see.
Why wouldn't you have a reason to? See, if I was left alone somewhere and I started questioning my Christianity and I read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and I was losing something that was most valuable to me, I'd want to be like, okay, maybe he's a historian, but maybe he's wrong. So maybe I should be checking these claims with the church or with other Mormon.
So rough stone rolling was one that I felt was basically on reproach. And there were other sources that I was looking into, things that had not been,
fair enough,
approved and given the green light by the leadership of the church. So there were podcasts that I was listening to, and they're just, they're reassuring me that, this historical.
See, the anti-podcasts are reinforcing what he's getting through rough stone rolling. The man does not know how to look for good information. Short-sighted, short thought. He's scared for his life because he's in a bad spot in Iraq. He's got a few months and he thinks, I'm going to meet my maker. Might as well get to know him. Gets to one troubling verse and turns to outside sources. Nowhere in anywhere here did I hear he was praying but didn't get answers. Nowhere anywhere here did I hear that he was looking to other good sources. It's rough stone rolling and other sources, unauthorized sources. And we all know what that means. It's your John DeLinds. It's your fill in the blanks that are giving him the feedback loop he needs to maintain this headspace, this opinion. And he's just sure this is God working through him and for him.
Witness given by this LDS historian is matching up with what secular historians are saying.
Okay. So this rough stone rolling, is it greenlit by the church?
So they sell it in their own bookstores.
Why?
I think because
they don't see it as what do you say, detrimental.
Well, it might just be a little bit of like risk analysis. Like would it be better for us to
hide
it and pretend that it doesn't exist, because that has bit them in the back before.
Right.
With
I'm sorry. No, it has not. It's not up to the church to disclose and talk about everything. They cannot. They cannot cover everything within the church history and doctrine that people tend to find offensive or slighting. You can't. It is impossible. I'd like to see the Catholics try this. Instead, it's like, look at the beauty of our Latin Mass. Oh, look at how old and venerable we are. Look at our pretty robes and our old architecture. And boy, haven't we been around forever. And they point to good popes like John Paul II and a few others, and they gloss over the bad ones, and they gloss over the multiple popes, and they gloss over the wars between Catholic factions and popes executing other popes. I'm sorry, but this is how short-sighted and empty this is.
With certain things like different attempts to hide things in the past have really come back to bite them. Like one example was there was his name is Mark Hoffman, and this was in
the church had. Okay, we're going to skip this. We'll come to Hoffman. But brothers and sisters, it's 3:30. Look, this brother, you need to know he doesn't go straight from LDS to Catholic either. He spends a couple years atheist, a couple years Protestant, different Protestants even, like each one, before he eventually finds his way to Catholicism. This kid's not sticking to anything. He can't find anything that's working for him. And I think, you can look here and you can see he's never actually ever applied himself to the LDS faith. Beyond, well, I went to young men's and seminary and scouts. He did not go on a mission. I've never once heard him talk about prayer. I didn't, and the common thing is, and maybe he talks about this in the second video, there's no looking for revelation here. Everything's all, I'm hanging out doing my thing, and occasionally I'll do some bookworm stuff. How far will that take you? What will that do for you? See, this is, Elder Ballard warned about this in like 2014, I think, in an address to CES instructors. That James said, let them ask of God, not of Google. And this is what he's done. I found something in the Book of Mormon I don't quite understand. But Rough Stone Rolling says, and that happens to match up with... Now see, that's the thing. And everything I was reading in Rough Stone Rolling matched up with what I was hearing on. He was never in a good headspace to learn this stuff anyway. The other materials around him were not good. He never thought of placing his trust in the Lord at any point. He was doing his thing, got put in a position where he might have to meet his maker, thought he might need to know him, and supplemented his scripture study with Rough Stone Rolling and unauthorized, unaccepted forms of content through the internet. Brothers and sisters, you can see this guy. He doesn't have anything mean to say about the church to begin with. I was raised a good, faithful kid. I went to seminary. That's how faithful I was. When it came time for a mission, well, I went through the loophole and joined the military instead. It means you didn't have faith to get out there and preach the gospel. Maybe you didn't have the knowledge. Maybe you didn't have both. Maybe he went to seminary and slept through it. Maybe he was an outstanding student. Maybe Boy Scouts was just a forced feed to get out of the house. Maybe it meant something to him. I don't know. But I wanted you to see here that nowhere, anywhere in here, is he at any point devoted to the gospel. I don't see it. If you see it, please let me know. But I don't see it. I don't see his devotion to the gospel here anywhere. I see him going through the motions, and he's there because it's what he knows. It's like, yeah, I got my friends. This is a good lifestyle. Things are nice. Fed well. Things are tidy. Family's well together. I've got my friends in the church, and we go to school together. He had a community who was it did what he needed to for him. And then he hit 21, 22, and decided he was smarter than all the collective wisdom of everyone still in the church who has read Jacob and knows about the polygamy loophole. Anyway, brothers and sisters, that's his backstory. After that, it really does turns into questions and answers, and him talking about his time as an atheist and how he left atheism after like 3 years or something like that, and how he didn't know what to do, but he went through a Hindu phase and then a Protestant phase, something to that effect. You get the idea. This guy is religion hopping, and I don't know that he'll stick with Catholicism. He might because of his wife and their cultural background. Possibly. We'll see. But this is what you call the unsteady member who's never really been in it. He's been put through the motions, and you'll see what he really understands about doctrine when we get into that in the next video. And that should drop on Saturday. Until then, I want to make better videos. Maybe I need to do them earlier instead of waiting till 2 o'clock. What do you think? Especially since I have to be up in 3 hours for seminary. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Peace out.